Welcome, dear listener, to this journey through the Middle Ages. As you settle in a moment of calm and relaxation, I invite you to share in the comments where in the world you are listening from. And what time of day is it for you? I always love to see how much our community of night owls has grown. If you enjoy immersing yourself in rich history to unwind, consider subscribing to more soothing channels. Stories like this. Imagine the night was quiet, as if the earth itself had drawn a heavy cloak of silence across its shoulders. In the distance, the dark outline of a ruined fortress rose against the pale glow of the moon. Its broken towers stretched like skeletal fingers towards the sky, and its hollow windows stared out like empty eyes, keeping secrets that no one alive could fully recall. The air carried with it the faint scent of moss and rain-soaked stone. Somewhere beyond the walls, an owl gave a slow, tremulous call, echoing through the forest like the voice of an ancient memory. And as you listen, the hush of time begins to unravel, whispering of myths once dismissed as fantasy, but later uncovered as truth. You see, the medieval world was woven with tales, some spun from fear, some from longing, some born of misunderstanding, and others from wisdom deeper than their age should have known. Scholars often laughed at them, brushed them aside as mere superstition, but the stones remembered, the soil remembered, and when the earth was opened centuries later, the myths awakened, stepping quietly back into the realm of fact. Tonight, we step into that world together. The first myth rises from the ashes of plague and sorrow. For centuries, the Black Death was wrapped in grotesque rumor. People whispered that it had been carried by poisoned air, or sent as a punishment from heaven. They told of plague doctors, figures draped in black, with long beaked masks that made them look like creatures of nightmare. Artists drew them in trembling strokes, and generations after believed these to be symbols, exaggerations, painted to frighten. But the soil told another story. Graves unearthed in forgotten corners revealed bones marked with the same disease, and old masks, once thought to be inventions of art, were found preserved, stuffed with dried herbs, rose petals, and vinegar-soaked sponges. They were not symbols at all, but desperate protections. Imagine the sound of their boots against cobblestone streets, the slow rasp of breath beneath the heavy mask, the scent of rosemary and cloves pressing against the stench of sickness. What had once been myth now stood in the light of proof, trembling but undeniable. And then there were the whispers of alchemy, of sorcerers hunched over flickering candles, surrounded by scrolls inked with cryptic symbols. Tales spoke of their search for the philosopher's stone, of their longing to turn lead into gold, of their dream of eternal life. Many dismissed these as fantasies, the daydreams of madmen. Yet when fragments of ancient manuscripts were pulled from the hidden chambers of monasteries, the ink still dark upon their yellowed parchment, something remarkable surfaced. Recipes for tinctures that mirrored early medicine, mixtures of herbs and minerals that, while not creating gold, held healing powers far beyond what one would expect of their age. The myth of alchemy, in its wildest sense, may have been a dream, but beneath the dream was truth, knowledge encoded, guarded, and disguised so carefully that centuries had mistaken it for magic. The voices of those alchemists still linger in the pages, their whispers, soft as the turning of fragile parchment, carried across centuries like a lullaby from the past. And in France, the tale of the man in the iron mask stretched across candlelit halls, lingering like smoke above the heads of nobles and peasants alike. Some claimed he was a twin brother to the king, hidden away for the sake of power. Others believed he was a man who had known too much, his identity forever erased by the cold embrace of iron. For years, the story was dismissed as legend, a fable of power and secrecy. Yet documents emerged from the folds of forgotten archives. Prison records spoke of a man moved from fortress to fortress, always kept in isolation, his face hidden, his name erased. No one truly knows who he was, but the myth was not a dream. There had been a man, and he had worn the mask. Imagine his silence, the soft clank of iron each time he shifted in his narrow bed, the weight pressing down upon his skin until the mask itself became his only identity. He lived and died as a secret, but the truth of his existence breathed life into a story once thought to be only ink and imagination. Beyond myths of plague, alchemy, and prisoners, there were quieter legends too, nestled in the folds of medieval life. Stories of forgotten saints, of wandering knights, of hidden treasures buried beneath cathedral stones. Some were dismissed gently, like children's tales, until evidence arose. Bones found beneath altar steps matching descriptions of saints once doubted. Coins, minted centuries before, uncovered beneath cloisters where monks had sworn they never were. The world of the Middle Ages was never as simple as scholars wished it to be. It was alive with shadows and murmurs, with dreams tangled into fact, and facts mistaken for dreams. The ruined fortress looms still in the moonlight. Its stones glisten as though damp with memory. The air is heavy, waiting, as if the earth itself yearns to speak more of what it remembers. You feel the centuries breathe, and you understand. The myths of the medieval world are not gone. They live beneath your feet. They live in the broken towers and the faded manuscripts. And when the silence deepens enough, you can almost hear them again. The night deepens. Clouds slip across the face of the moon, and the fortress fades into shadow, as though retreating once more into silence. But silence is never truly empty. It holds echoes, waiting for those who care to listen. There is another story the stones remember, one born in a hush of monasteries, where the world outside seemed distant, almost unreal. The monks spoke in whispers, chanting prayers that lingered in the rafters like smoke. But beneath their hymns, beneath the soft scratch of quills across parchment, there were other voices, voices of legends, voices of forgotten truths. In those cloisters, the myth of the green children was whispered. 2 children, pale and silent, were said to have appeared in an English village. Their skin carried a faint green hue, and they spoke no language the villagers understood. Many dismissed the tale as wild invention, no more real than fairies or goblins. Yet later, accounts traced their existence to a real place, their strange coloring perhaps born of malnutrition, their language a dialect lost in the folds of history. The myth dissolved not into nothing, but into something gentler, a misunderstanding of reality. And yet, the wonder of it remained that children so strange could walk into the heart of a medieval village, carrying with them a story that would ripple for centuries. Farther east, in the lands where trade routes wound like ribbons across continents, myths spread with the merchants who carried silk and spices. They told of beasts with horns like spears and hides tough as armor creatures no one in the West had ever seen. Some called them monsters, others miracles. Unicorns, they whispered. For generations, these unicorn tales were woven into tapestries, painted in gold upon the margins of manuscripts. Scholars dismissed them as symbols of purity, no more real than angels painted with wings. But later centuries uncovered the truth. Narwhal tusks, carried by northern traders, had given birth to the myth. To medieval eyes, they were relics of wonder, spiraled horns of a creature they could not imagine. So the unicorn lived in 2 worlds at once. In the imagination, a radiant beast of light, and in reality, a fragment of bone from the sea. The myth was not false. It was simply another language for truth. There is also the legend of the Knights Templar. Wrapped in secrecy, their brotherhood inspired whispers of buried treasures, hidden scrolls, and sacred relics. When the order was crushed, myths grew like ivy around their memory. They said the knights had carried away the Holy Grail, that they had buried knowledge so powerful it could change the world. For centuries, these were tales for dreamers and poets. But in the shadows of crumbling castles and beneath the soil of forgotten chapels, fragments were found: seals, coins, symbols etched into stone. While the Grail itself may remain elusive, the existence of secret vaults, of hidden networks of safe houses, was confirmed. The Templars were not mere myth. They were flesh and bone and steel. Their silence gave birth to stories, and the stories, in turn, became their immortality. The night grows colder. The stars glitter as though the sky itself has been pierced by ancient swords. You walk deeper into the ruin, your hand brushing against the damp stone of the fortress wall. Each touch feels like a heartbeat, faint but persistent. And then comes another tale, the myth of the wandering dead. In villages swept by plague, people told of corpses that rose from graves, pale and restless, haunting the living. These were not yet the vampires of later lore, but shadowy ancestors of the myth. Medieval scribes wrote of shrouded figures scratching at church doors, their presence heavy as smoke. Scholars once dismissed these stories as the frightened imaginings of people crushed by grief. But archaeological studies uncovered graves where corpses had been pinned with stones, or jaws forced open with bricks. These were no ordinary burials. They were acts of defense, meant to keep the dead from rising again. The myth was not just fear. It was action. People believed so deeply in the walking dead that they altered the very way they laid their loved ones to rest. The silence of the grave was not trusted, and in that mistrust, the myth found its truth. The fortress groans as the wind slides through broken arches. A fragment of stone falls, landing softly among weeds that have claimed the courtyard. The past feels close, pressing at the edges of the night. Think of the peasants who once lived beyond these walls. Their days were carved from labor, their nights from prayer. To them, myths were not merely stories. They were explanations, comforts, warnings. They carried them like talismans, woven into lullabies and fireside whispers. And now, centuries later, you are here, listening to their echoes. The myths they spoke still ripple through time. They may wear new shapes, but their hearts are unchanged. The world of the Middle Ages was not built from stone alone. It was built from story, layered upon story, truth and dream woven so tightly together that one could not be separated from the other. The moon slides free of its clouds once more, silvering the broken towers. The air feels older here, as though every breath carries the weight of centuries. And as you stand among the ruins, you realize that the myths are not gone. They are living, fragile as cobwebs, strong as stone, waiting for those who will pause long enough to hear them. The fortress, the night, the silence, they all lean closer, as if ready to share more. This is only the beginning. The fortress fades behind you, its broken towers swallowed by the forest's hush. The path bends downward, carrying you into valleys where the air is heavy with the scent of earth and fallen leaves. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, bells toll from a distant cathedral, slow and mournful, as if time itself were being measured in size. Here, in the valleys of kings and kingdoms, another kind of myth begins to stir. These are not myths of plague or wandering dead. These are myths born in palaces, whispered behind velvet curtains, carved into the air by the weight of crowns. One such myth drifted through the courts of England, the tale of King Arthur, the once and future king. For centuries, scholars called him a legend, a dream woven from Celtic folklore, a hero no more real than the dragons he fought. But beneath abbeys and in the damp soil of forgotten battlefields, relics emerged, fragments of swords, inscriptions carved into stone, traces of a chieftain whose story stretched far beyond his own life. The scholars could no longer dismiss it so easily. Arthur may not have been the king of shining armor and round tables, yet someone, or perhaps many someones, had lived, fought, and inspired the myth. His name carried the weight of memory, transformed by time into legend, yet rooted in truth. Imagine the flicker of torchlight against the stones of Camelot, whether real or imagined. The sound of armored boots crossing a hall where banners hung heavy with dust. The myth and the man blurred together, and the story endured, a candle flame trembling, but never extinguished. Across the Channel, in France, another story grew like ivy along the walls of memory. It was said that Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, had risen from obscurity, a shepherd girl who heard the voices of saints. To her enemies, she was a witch. To her followers, a savior. Her visions, her voices, were long dismissed as delusions, a convenient story for a desperate people. But when records were unsealed and examined, when her words were studied not as legend, but as testimony, a truth emerged. Joan had spoken clearly, with detail and conviction beyond her years. Whether the voices came from heaven or the chambers of her mind, they had been real to her, powerful enough to move armies and alter the course of nations. Her myth was not falsehood. It was truth refracted, like light through stained glass, bending but never breaking. And so, centuries later, the girl who burned at the stake became a saint, her voice echoing still through the halls of cathedrals where prayers rise like smoke. Deeper still lies the myth of the royal touch, the belief that kings and queens could heal the sick with a single hand. For centuries, crowds gathered at palaces, peasants waiting with trembling hope that a monarch's touch could cure the king's evil, the swelling of the lymph nodes that we now call scrofula. To modern eyes, it seemed superstition, no more real than fairy dust. Yet records tell of thousands healed, or at least comforted, beneath royal hands. Some cases may have been coincidence, others the quiet strength of belief itself. What is faith, after all, if not a power that can mend the body as well as the heart? The myth was not empty. It was a ritual, a bond between ruler and subject, woven so tightly into the fabric of medieval life that it became a kind of truth. The sound of blessing, whispered by a king, lingered in the air like a benediction, as real as any cure. The valley grows darker, the path narrowing between ancient oaks. Their branches twist together overhead, forming a canopy that shuts out the stars. The night grows thick, and within its hush, another myth stirs. It is the tale of Richard the Lionheart, the Crusader king whose name carried the thunder of battle. Stories painted him larger than life, a warrior who could turn the tide of war with a single charge. Many thought the tales exaggerated, gilded by minstrels' songs. But chronicles written by his enemies, not his allies, told the same, of a man fierce in combat, fearless, unyielding. Excavations along Crusader routes unearthed weapons, armor, even bones scarred by battle, silent witnesses to wars fought in foreign lands. The myth of the lion-hearted king was not a fable. It was the echo of steel against steel, the cry of a man who bore the weight of a crown into the chaos of holy war. And so, beneath the crown, shadows deepened. Myths were not lies. There were truths clothed in wonder, truths bent by the passage of time, but never erased. The bells toll again, softer now, as if carried by the wind from miles away. Their echo fades, and you find yourself standing before another ruin, not a fortress this time, but the bones of a cathedral. Its roof is gone, its windows shattered, but the stones still hum with the memory of chants and prayers. And in this place, another story waits to be told. The cathedral walls rise around you, vast and skeletal. Columns stretch toward a roof that no longer exists, their arches opening into the darkened sky. The moonlight filters down through the empty space, silvering the stone. And for a moment, the ruin feels like a vessel, a chalice holding centuries of voices. The stones remember prayers whispered here, the rhythm of psalms, rising like waves against the vaulted ceiling that once was. They remember also the stories spoken in hushed tones, stories that wove through faith like threads of shadow and light. Myths that began as whispers in cloisters, yet endured long after the last monk's footsteps faded from these halls. One such myth was of the Holy Grail, tales told of a sacred cup, the vessel that once held the blood of Christ. It was said to be hidden, protected, carried across mountains and seas, guarded by those who swore their lives to its secrecy. Kings sought it, knights bled for it, poets sang of it. For centuries, scholars scoffed. The Grail, they said, was no more than a symbol, an allegory of faith, purity, or divine truth. But then, relics surfaced. Chalices buried beneath monasteries, adorned with strange markings, their origins older than the stones themselves. Pilgrims swore to visions, to healings, to mysteries too great to explain. The Grail's myth did not die because it was never only a myth. It was belief made tangible, a dream that shaped kingdoms, a story so powerful it blurred the line between reality and eternity. Even now, in the quiet of the ruined cathedral, you feel it, a presence, faint as the shimmer of starlight upon broken stone. Perhaps the Grail was never an object at all. Perhaps it was always a mirror, reflecting the faith of those who sought it. Another legend rises here, the tale of relics. In the Middle Ages, every cathedral boasted a fragment of wonder, a saint's bone, a thorn from the crown, a drop of holy blood sealed within glass. To skeptics, they seemed frauds, trinkets sold to gullible pilgrims. And yes, some were, yet not all. In hidden crypts and reliquaries, tests in later centuries confirmed the age of certain relics, their origins tracing back to the very soil of Jerusalem, to the bones of people who had walked in the early centuries of the Church. Not all myths crumble beneath the touch of science. Some endure, weathered but resilient. Imagine the pilgrims pressing forward, candles trembling in their hands, eyes shining with tears. The relics glowed not because of what they were, but because of what people believed them to be. And that belief itself carved history, shaping cathedrals, fueling journeys, moving nations. The myths of crowns and relics intertwine with another, darker story, the whispers of curses. It was said that kings who defied the church, or nobles who betrayed sacred vows, fell beneath unseen hands. The Templar curse, most famous of all, echoed across France. When Jacques de Molay, last Grand Master of the Templars, burned at the stake, he called upon King Philip and Pope Clement to meet him before God within a year. It was dismissed as theater, the rage of a dying man. Yet within that very year, both the king and the pope were dead, their thrones trembling, their lineages shattered. Coincidence, said the scholars. But to the people of the Middle Ages, it was proof. Myths walked hand in hand with justice, and curses could outlive even crowns. The wind moves through the broken cathedral, curling like smoke around the shattered altar. You can almost hear the crackle of fire, the cries of the condemned, the whisper of words carried into eternity. And then, from the farthest edges of Europe, came the tales of royal bloodlines touched by the divine. Kings claimed descent from heroes, from saints, from the very figures of Scripture. For centuries, genealogies were thought to be inventions, woven to secure crowns. Yet fragments of DNA, studied in modern times, revealed bloodlines stretching back across borders, confirming links once thought impossible. The myth of divine blood may have been a dream, but hidden within it was truth, the threads of ancestry that bound rulers across nations, across centuries, across the fragile fabric of time. The cathedral sighs, the stones settling into silence, and you realize that myths do not belong only to the common people, or to poets and monks. They belong also to kings and queens, to crowns and thrones, to palaces and courts where whispers weighed as heavily as swords. The night is almost still now. The wind softens. The bells far away have fallen silent. In this hush, you sense that the myths have not ended. They linger, waiting beyond the broken walls, ready to follow you further into the dark. For the Middle Ages were not a world of simple truths. They were a world of stories, some carved in stone, others sung in song, others hidden in silence. Stories that shaped faith, that forged crowns, that drew blood, that refused to die. And as you step out from the ruined cathedral into the night, where the stars glimmer cold and patient, you know this. The myths of the past are not gone. They walk beside you, shadows and whispers, truths clothed in wonder. And they are not finished speaking. The road bends away from the cathedral ruins, curving into hills where the grass sways like a dark sea beneath the wind. Ahead, the horizon is broken by the silhouette of a watchtower, a solitary finger of stone rising against the stars. It stands apart, silent, as if guarding not the land, but the secrets hidden within it. As you approach, the ground crunches beneath your feet, pebbles scattered like relics of forgotten battles. The tower seems empty now, its doorway gaping like the mouth of a cave. Yet inside, you can almost hear the murmur of voices that once kept vigil here, the watchmen of ages past, their eyes fixed upon distant borders where danger and myth blurred into one. For towers such as these were not only stone, they were memory, carved upward into the sky. It is here that the myths of watchers and guardians gather. In the Middle Ages, tales spread of strange lights upon hills, of flames that burned without fire, of figures who appeared at the edges of battlefields, silent, watching, neither joining nor leaving. Some called them angels. Others said they were spirits of the dead, bound to linger where blood had been spilled. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as the fevered imaginings of frightened soldiers. Yet chronicles written across nations from France to the Holy Roman Empire, from the Crusader states to the Scottish Highlands, spoke of the same visions. Flickering lights at night, shadows that moved without sound. Archaeological records revealed layers of soot on certain hills, traces of watchfires that had burned for months or years. And yet, in some places, no evidence of fire remained, only the testimony of those who swore the lights had been real. Myths, perhaps, but also a pattern, etched so deeply into history that it could not be ignored. The tower seems to lean closer as you step inside, its stones damp with centuries of rain. The air is cool, almost cold, but it hums faintly, as though the walls themselves are still listening. Here, you remember another myth, the Black Knight. Not a single man, but a figure who appeared in countless tales across Europe. Always faceless, always silent, the Black Knight was said to challenge heroes, to test their worth, to haunt the edges of tournaments and wars. Many dismissed him as a symbol of fate, an invention of storytellers. Yet in records of jousts and battles, there are entries of unnamed knights, challengers who appeared suddenly, fought fiercely, and vanished without a trace. They bore no heraldry, no crest, no banner, only black armor, polished like obsidian. Who they were, no one knew. perhaps wanderers, perhaps exiles, perhaps something more. The myth of the Black Knight grew not because it was false, but because it was many truths folded into one, a mirror for mystery itself. And the tower remembers them, still the thud of hooves, the clash of lances, the echo of silence left behind. Beyond knights, there were other watchers. In villages pressed against the forest's edge, peasants whispered of green-clad figures who slipped between trees, protectors or thieves, depending on who told the tale. They became the myths of outlaws, most famously Robin Hood. For centuries, Robin was dismissed as fiction, a character of ballads and plays. Yet scraps of records surfaced, names similar to his, men accused of outlawry in Sherwood, figures both admired and hunted. Perhaps not one man, but many, their stories woven into one myth. And here lies the truth of myths. They are not always lies. They are threads of countless lives, woven together until they form a tapestry so vivid it feels alive. Robin's arrow still hums in the silence of the forest. The watchers of the greenwood still walk in the shadows of history. The tower creaks with the wind, its stones trembling faintly. You climb a narrow staircase that spirals upward, your footsteps muffled by dust. At the top, the world opens before you, hills rolling into darkness, forests spreading like oceans, rivers glimmering faintly under moonlight. It is here, above the land, that you sense another myth, the omen of ravens. In castles and battlefields alike, the presence of ravens was seen as a sign. If they gathered above a king, it meant death. If they flew ahead of an army, it meant victory. For centuries, these were said to be superstitions, the imaginings of frightened men. But naturalists later confirmed what medieval eyes had only guessed. Ravens gather where death comes. Their presence foreshadowed battles, storms, and famines not by magic, but by instinct. Yet to those who saw them, the birds were more than animals. They were messengers, their black wings riding fate across the sky. The tower roof seems alive with them now, though the night is still. You hear the soft rustle of feathers, the slow beat of wings, and the myths of watchers stretch their shadows across your thoughts. Down below, in the valleys, the people told of other silent guardians, the night monks, cloaked figures who appeared on roads at dusk, carrying lanterns that never went out. Pilgrims swore they were protected by them, guided safely through forests. Others swore they vanished if one tried to follow. No records confirmed them, yet too many voices spoke the same. Perhaps monks who traveled in secret, perhaps wanderers carrying relics, or perhaps something more, a story that grew from the comfort of believing one was not alone in the dark. The myths of watchers are myths of protection and of fear. They remind us that someone or something is always present just beyond the edge of sight. The wind shifts, colder now. You descend the staircase, step out into the grass once more. The tower looms behind you, its shadow stretching long across the ground. And as you walk away, you feel it, watching still. The myths are not done. They follow you like silent companions, and ahead, the road bends deeper into the unknown. The road from the watchtower winds into the valley, where the earth feels softer, damp beneath your steps. The night is darker here. Trees crowd together, their branches twisting like fingers, their roots pushing through the soil like old bones. The silence is deep, but not empty. It is the kind that listens. You hear it then, the faint drip of water from a spring, hidden somewhere among the rocks. The sound echoes as though the earth itself were breathing. And in that hush, more myths rise, drawn from the shadows, as though the trees themselves remember. The first is the legend of the wild hunt. Across Europe, from Germany to Scandinavia, peasants spoke of spectral riders galloping through the night sky. They said storms and howls of wind were not weather at all, but the thunder of ghostly hooves, the cries of hounds that belonged to no living master. For centuries, scholars called it folklore, a tale to frighten children into staying home after dusk. Yet sagas and chronicles recorded the same of villagers, trembling as storms tore across the sky, swearing they had seen riders with burning eyes, cloaks streaming like smoke behind them. Modern minds say the wild hunt may have been memories of armies riding by night, their torches mistaken for fire in the clouds. Or perhaps it was the northern lights, weaving shapes across the heavens. But to those who lived in the Middle Ages, the hunt was real. They nailed horseshoes above doors, whispered prayers at dusk, and dared not wander when the wind grew restless. Imagine it now, the roar of the storm above, the flash of fire against the clouds, the pounding of hooves that may be thunder, or maybe something more. The myths of the Watchers are not gentle. Some ride with fury. Deeper into the forest lies another tale, the silent monks of the mountains. Travelers swore they saw processions at midnight, rows of hooded figures, candles glowing in their hands, moving wordlessly along ridges and valleys. No monastery stood nearby, no village that could explain them. When followed, they vanished. Some said they were the souls of monks who had died in plague, doomed to walk forever. Others believed they were guardians, protecting the land. In later centuries, hikers claimed to see the same lights, glowing like fireflies across the ridges. Scientists spoke of natural gases, of tricks of light. But the myth endures, shimmering between truth and dream, a procession forever climbing the mountainside. You pause along the forest road, and for an instant, you see it. Faint lights moving between the trees, too steady to be fireflies, too soft to be torches. A procession of silence. And then, they are gone. Another watcher waits in the folklore of villages that church grim. It was said that when a church was built, the first creature buried in its yard became the guardian spirit. Often it was a black dog, sacrificed in silence. Its ghost would linger, patrolling the churchyard, keeping away thieves and restless dead. To skeptics, this was a gruesome fable. Yet graves of animals have been found beneath some medieval churches, their bones laid carefully beneath cornerstones. The myth was no mere invention. It was ritual, a belief carved into action. And so, when peasants whispered of dogs with glowing eyes standing at the edge of graveyards, perhaps they were not imagining at all. Perhaps they were remembering. The forest presses closer, shadows deepening. For a moment, you almost hear the low growl of a hound just beyond sight. The myths of guardians feel suddenly alive. And then, from the sea, comes another story. Coastal villages told of silent figures upon the cliffs at dusk, watchers who stood with faces hidden, cloaks fluttering in the wind. Some called them fishermen's ghosts, drowned souls returned to keep vigil. Others said they were spirits of the land itself, guarding the shore from storms. What strikes the heart is that these figures appeared again and again, across countries, across centuries. Perhaps tricks of the mist, perhaps the imagination of lonely sailors. But the repetition, the consistency, wove them into something more. A myth that endured because it was shared, because it was believed, because somewhere, someone saw them, standing there. The path leads out of the forest now, into open land where the grass ripples like dark water beneath the wind. Above, the sky is wide, endless, filled with stars so sharp they seem to pierce the night. And here, you feel the presence of all the watchers, the monks, the knights, the riders, the dogs, the silent figures of shore and sky. They are not gone. They are here, threaded into the fabric of the medieval night. Myths born of fear and hope, of faith and uncertainty. Myths that were not merely stories, but explanations, comforts, protections against a world that was vast and unknowable. The silence of the land hums with them, a low whisper beneath the breath of the wind. You realize the truth now. The myths of Watchers endure not because they were proven or disproven, but because they answered the one question that all who lived in the Middle Ages carried in their hearts. Are we ever truly alone in the dark? The answer, whispered across centuries, is no. The road stretches ahead, faint beneath the starlight. Behind you, the tower stands like a sentinel, its shadow long upon the hills. Ahead, more myths wait of healers and dreamers, of saints and shadows. And the night invites you forward, deeper still. The road carries you down into a valley, where the air grows damp with the scent of herbs and earth. The forest thins, replaced by meadows filled with soft night flowers that open only beneath the moon. The stars scatter their pale fire above, and the hush of the valley feels deeper, protective, as though the land itself is watching over you. It is here that the myths of healing whisper, carried in the breath of leaves and the murmur of streams. In medieval villages, when sickness crept into a home, people turned first not to physicians, few and distant, but to women whose names were passed in hushed voices, the healers. Some called them wise women, others midwives, others witches. They carried baskets of herbs, knew the touch of roots and flowers, the rhythm of seasons, the hidden strength of plants. Stories painted them both as angels and demons. One tale speaks of a woman in the English countryside who, with only honey and thyme, soothed the cough of a child who had been fading for days. Word spread, and mothers carried their children to her door. She saved many. Yet when the harvest failed and fear grew, whispers turned against her. They said she had stolen the crops with her spells. For centuries, these myths were thought to be inventions, fear-driven tales. But buried texts and careful research revealed that many women truly held remarkable knowledge. Recipes of willow bark to ease fever, lavender to calm nerves, garlic to fight infection. Science now confirms what they already knew. Myths of witches, it seems, were often myths of healers. The wind moves gently over the meadow, carrying the scent of herbs, as if those women still walk unseen. You can almost hear the soft rattle of dried roots in their pouches, the quiet hum of a lullaby sung to a sick child. Then, there were the saints. Stories of miracles spread across Europe, whispered from monastery to village, from village to city. Some tales were wild, others tender, but many found roots in truth. One such tale is of Saint Walpurga. In Germany, her name was called upon against famine and plague. People told of oil seeping from her tomb, oil that cured sickness. Skeptics dismissed it as superstition, yet centuries later, visitors still saw the drops of liquid forming on her stone, collected in small vials, its source unexplained. Another was Saint Roche, who, it was said, healed victims of plague with only the sign of the cross. Wherever he walked, the dying rose, the fevered grew calm. His image spread across paintings and chapels. And though historians argue whether all miracles were real, the devotion was undeniable. In cities struck by pestilence, people clung to him, not as myth, but as hope. Imagine it now, a plague-darkened street, the air heavy with fear. And through it, a man walking slowly, a dog at his side, offering a touch that brings sudden peace. Myth or miracle, the memory endures. But healing myths did not always glow with holiness. Some carried shadows. In the Chronicles of France, people spoke of the king's touch, a belief that monarchs of France and England could heal scrofula, a disease of the skin, with their hands. Crowds gathered, lining the roads, waiting to be touched by the king. For centuries, this ritual endured, and many swore they were healed. Today, science tells us that no royal hand could cure disease. Yet perhaps the truth lies elsewhere. Hope itself is a medicine, and faith a balm. In the desperate hearts of the medieval poor, the king's touch was more than a myth. It was a lifeline. The meadow narrows into a stream, silver beneath the moonlight. Its trickle soothes the air, and myths of water rise with it. For water was healing, always. The well of St. Winifred in Wales was said to spring from the ground where the saint was slain. Its waters never ceased, cold and clear, and pilgrims bathed in them for centuries, believing in cures of blindness, paralysis, fever. Archaeologists found offerings piled near its base, tokens left by hands that believed, hands that hoped. The spring still runs today, its surface rippling like a mirror of old faith. You pause beside the stream, letting the sound sink into the stillness. The myths of healers are not only of people, but of the earth itself, flowing endlessly beneath time. As you walk onward, you notice how these myths blur the line between faith and fear. A woman with herbs could be savior or witch. A king could be healer or fraud. A saint could be miracle worker or only memory. And yet, all were believed. That belief, that need, is what gave them life. For in the Middle Ages, when medicine was scarce, when death walked easily through streets and fields, the smallest hope became sacred. Myths were not just stories, they were remedies, prayers, the fragile bridge between despair and survival. The valley opens into a gentle slope, leading toward hills shadowed against the stars. The night feels warmer here, filled with breath, with pulse, with a lingering memory of herbs and oils, saints and whispered charms. And you realize something. The myths of healing are not distant, not buried in books. They live still, in the touch of herbs, in the water of springs, in the faith of those who once believed enough to leave tokens by a well, or kneel at the grave of a saint. The path beckons upward, and the night promises more. The path rises gently, winding through dark pines. Their branches breathe in the night wind, whispering like old voices. As you climb, the myths shift from herbs and springs to relics and sacred shadows, for, in the Middle Ages, objects themselves were said to heal, to guard, to carry divine power. One of the most enduring myths was the belief in holy relics. Pieces of bone, fragments of cloth, splinters of wood, these were treasured more than gold. A vial of dust said to be from the Holy Land, a strip of cloth believed to be from the Virgin Mary's veil, even drops of blood said to belong to saints. Pilgrims walked across kingdoms to touch these relics, believing in their healing strength. In Chartres Cathedral, France, the most prized relic was the Sancta Camicia, the tunic said to have been worn by Mary during the birth of Christ. When plague struck, people gathered beneath it, praying for mercy. Some claimed the air itself became lighter, as if illness fled before the relic. Scholars today question many of these claims, pointing out that countless cathedrals all claimed to possess the same fragments of the true cross, or multiple heads of the same saint. And yet, beneath the skepticism remains a truth. Relics gave hope, and hope gave healing. But relics were not only holy, some were feared. In the back streets of Prague, chronicles speak of the golem, a figure shaped of clay by Rabbi Lowe, brought to life to defend the Jewish quarter. Though not a relic in the usual sense, it became one the dust said to remain from its body was thought to hold protective power. Mothers whispered of it when illness struck, telling their children the golem still guarded them in shadows. Other tales tell of cursed relics, a shard of a saint's bone that, when stolen, brought plagues to the thief's village, a chalice once used in ritual that left the hands of its taker blistered. These stories moved like warnings across Europe, half true, half feared, teaching people that sacred things were not to be touched without reverence. The air cools as the path reaches a crest, opening onto a ridge where the moon spills silver over stone ruins. Their arches stand broken, ivy wrapping around them like old hands. This was once a monastery, long abandoned. Here the myths of healing mingle with silence. Among monks, medicine and myth were never separate. In their herb gardens, monks grew mint, sage, fennel, hyssop. They copied texts, preserving scraps of Roman knowledge alongside medieval beliefs. Many monasteries were known as infirmaries of the soul and body. But the myths around them often outgrew the truth. Villagers spoke of monks who could heal with a glance, or who brewed potions that cured anything. Some even said certain monasteries had books of forbidden recipes, the Liber Mortis, containing spells to raise the dead. These were fears as much as myths, born from the mystery of walls most people never entered. There were also tales of wandering healers, men who carried charms and whispered prayers, traveling from town to town. They offered cures in exchange for bread or coin. Some called them charlatans. Others swore by their touch. One legend from Italy tells of a healer who carried a pouch of small stones. He would press one into the palm of the sick, saying it carried the strength of mountains. Strangely, some who received these stones recovered. Was it trickery, or was there something to the weight of belief itself? Modern historians note how powerful the mind can be in healing. Placebo, suggestion, faith, these are real forces. And so, perhaps those stones did carry power, not from mountains, but from trust. Beyond healers, myths spoke of curses that brought sickness. In the medieval imagination, disease was rarely random. If a village fell ill, it was because someone had cursed it. If a child wasted away, it was the evil eye. Amulets of iron, small crosses of lead, strings of red wool were worn to guard against unseen malice. One of the most feared curses was that of the leper's shadow. People believed that if the shadow of a leper fell across you, the sickness would pass into your flesh. Lepers were forced to carry bells, warning others to stay away. The cruelty was immense, yet the myth endured, shaping fear and exile. And yet, buried in that cruelty, lies a strange truth. Lepers did carry disease, though not in shadows, not in bells, but in touch and blood. Myths twisted reality into superstition, but at their core, they were desperate attempts to explain what could not yet be explained. The ridge narrows, and you follow it carefully. To your right, the land dips into forest. To your left, the moonlight stretches across open plains. The wind is cooler here, sharper, but it carries a deep stillness that soothes. You pause at a fallen stone arch. Around its base, small flowers grow pale and star-like. They were once called Stars of Bethlehem, believed to heal grief as much as illness. Women pressed them into books of prayer. Monks laid them on graves. Healing, you realize, was never only for the body. Myths gave healing to the heart. Stories themselves were medicine. To believe a saint walked beside you. To think a relic shielded your home. To imagine herbs carried secret power, these myths comforted as much as they cured. From the ridge, the path begins to descend again, winding into another valley. The shadows deepen, thick with pine and night song. You feel the myths of healers lingering behind you like echoes. Women with herbs, kings with touches, saints with oil, relics with light. Were they true? In part. Were they myths? In part also. But what mattered most was the belief they carried. Belief strong enough to ease pain, to calm fear, to hold life steady in times of plague and hunger. At the bottom of the slope, a faint glow flickers ahead, the promise of firelight. Another chapter waits. Myths not of healing this time, but of darker shadows, of curses and omens that haunted the medieval night. The path bends, and the glow grows brighter, waiting to draw you deeper. The glow ahead becomes clearer, a ring of torches around an open clearing. Their flames bend in the night breeze, tall and flickering, as if they are guardians of old tales. Beyond them, the world darkens, and here begins a chapter, not of cures and blessings, but of warnings, omens, and cursed signs that once ruled the medieval mind. The Middle Ages were an age of signs. People searched the skies, the forests, the cries of animals for meaning. Every strange sound, every sudden shadow, every unnatural birth. These were not accidents, but messages. And the greatest of these messages were omens of disaster. A comet, for example, was never a simple star with a tail. It was a sword of fire, a herald of plague or war. Chroniclers wrote of the great comet of 1066, blazing in the heavens before the Battle of Hastings. To the Normans, it promised victory. To the Anglo-Saxons, it warned of ruin. Both were right, depending on where you stood. Even in later centuries, comets filled chronicles with dread. The Great Comet of 1347 was linked in memory to the Black Death that followed. People looked upward, trembling, believing the skies themselves cursed them. Yet not only the heavens spoke, the earth itself whispered signs. Ravens circling above a village, dogs howling through the night, owls crying near a window, all were omens of death. Cats, too, carried dread. A black cat crossing a path was not a small creature at all, but a messenger of witches, or the devil himself. To see one at night was to feel the cold breath of fate. In the countryside, farmers feared the cry of the banshee, not only in Ireland, where it was first sung of, but whispered across Europe. A wailing woman in the night was a sign that death walked near. Sometimes the sound came from wind twisting through old beams, sometimes from foxes screaming in the dark. Yet the myth gave it shape, the spirit keening for souls. Children, too, were read as omens. In medieval chronicles, monstrous births were written as warnings from God. A child born with 2 heads, or with limbs misshapen, was never seen as chance, but as a curse upon a kingdom, or a prophecy of divine wrath. One such story tells of a boy born in Ravenna in 1512, with a horn rising from his forehead and scales on his skin. Pamphlets spread the tale across Europe, saying he was a sign of coming wars. Indeed, not long after, battles swept Italy. The child himself is lost to history, but the myth outlived him, shaping fear across nations. But perhaps the most haunting omens were found in the churchyards and monasteries themselves. Candles that flickered suddenly during Mass were said to foretell death in the parish. If a candle guttered out without wind, it meant a soul would soon leave the earth. Shadows cast by church towers were also read. If the shadow fell long across a graveyard, it was thought to claim another body before the season ended. And then there were the death watches. These were beetles that tapped their heads against wood inside homes at night. People lying awake, sick or sorrowful, heard the ticking and believed it was the clock of death, counting down their final hours. In truth, it was a simple insect. Yet how many hearts must have tightened at that hollow sound in the dark? The torches flicker higher, and you step closer into the clearing. Stones circle the ground, and at their center burns a low fire. It feels like the kind of place where omens would be read. You can almost imagine an old woman standing here, cloak heavy on her shoulders, gazing into flames, whispering what she sees. Diviners, seers, wise women, they walked among villages, half feared, half sought. Some read omens in smoke, others in entrails of animals, others in the flight of birds. Even kings listened to them. When Emperor Barbarossa drowned in 1190 during the Third Crusade, some claimed it had been foreseen by birds flying strangely across his camp days before. When the Black Prince of England fell ill, his household remembered the night owls that had cried outside his tent. Omens gave shape to chaos. They turned the unknowable into signs, signs into warnings, warnings into stories. There were two cursed objects that brought their own omens. A broken mirror, rare though mirrors were, was thought to split the soul. A silver coin, bent in half, was said to carry bad luck until buried. Shoes left upside down by accident foretold a journey that would end in grief. The most dreaded of all were cursed books. Medieval libraries whispered of manuscripts that carried doom to their readers. One was said to be bound in the skin of a heretic, another written with ink mixed with poisoned herbs. Scholars who read them either went mad or died within a year. Were these tales true? Likely not. But they revealed how much fear was woven into parchment, how knowledge itself could feel dangerous. And above all omens, none weighed heavier than the shadow of the plague. When rats scurried in the streets, when the air smelled strange, when storms came in unnatural patterns, people said these were omens of pestilence. The Black Death turned every sign into a curse. Stars, animals, winds, even the sudden silence of birds. Chroniclers wrote of whole towns hearing ghostly bells before plague struck, though no church had rung. Science would later speak of fleas, of bacteria, of invisible truths. But for the medieval soul, omens were the only language in which death spoke. The fire in the clearing crackles softly, the flames bowing low as if listening. The torches around you burn higher, their smoke trailing into the night. And you feel the weight of those old fears' skies, burning with comets, owls weeping through the dark, beetles ticking their hollow clocks. The clearing is quiet now, but it carries centuries of dread, centuries of people waiting for the next sign. The path forward fades into shadow again. Somewhere beyond, deeper myths await not of omens alone, but of curses that clung to bloodlines, families, and forgotten lands. The night grows deeper. You step toward it. The path curves around the firelit clearing, winding into woods, heavy with silence. The torches are left behind, and now the trees grow thicker, their roots clawing out of the soil like the bones of the earth. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. Its call carries across the stillness, and for a moment, you can imagine how such a sound once filled the human heart with dread. This is the land of curses, where omens became not only warnings, but destinies. One of the most enduring legends was the curse upon the house of the Templars. When the Knights Templar were arrested in 1307 by King Philip IV of France, their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned alive at the stake. As the flames rose, he was said to have cried out, cursing both Philip and Pope Clement V, summoning them before God's judgment within a year. The chronicles tell it thus: within months, Clement died. Within the same year, so too did Philip. To the medieval mind, this was no coincidence. It was the proof of a curse, and the line of Philip, through twists of fate, soon collapsed into the chaos of the 100 Years' War. For generations, whispers said that the king's blood carried the Templars' curse, and that none of his heirs would know peace. But it was not only kings who were said to be doomed. Whole lands bore curses in their soil. In Ireland, stories spoke of the Hill of Tara, where ancient kings once sat in power. It was believed that those who disturbed the land unjustly would fall to ruin. In one tale, an English governor attempted to dig into the sacred mound for treasure. Within a year, his fortunes crumbled, and he died in disgrace. In Wales, the legend of the Ceffyl Door, a spectral horse rising from streams, haunted roads and crossings. Those who mounted it were doomed, for the horse would gallop high into the sky, then vanish, dropping its rider to their death. Farmers swore they heard its hoofbeats at night, echoing across meadows, a warning to stay away from lonely waters. France, too, had its cursed lands. The forest of Brocéliande, tied forever to the myths of Merlin and Morgan Le Fay, was said to swallow men who entered it with greed or violence in their hearts. Travelers told of disappearing paths, of voices luring them into endless circles, of never finding the edge of the wood again. Even fields could bear omens. In parts of Germany, peasants feared the blue tacker, the blood field. These were meadows where battles had once raged. Grass grew taller, thicker, with an unnatural red tinge. To walk through them at night, it was said, was to hear the groans of the dead beneath the soil. Yet no curse frightened Europe more than those said to cling to bloodlines. Consider the tale of the Anjou dynasty. Folklore claimed that their ancestor was no mortal at all, but the demoness Melusine. She was said to appear as a woman with the body of a serpent, bathing in secret once each week. When her husband betrayed her trust and spied on her transformation, she fled, but not before binding her bloodline with strange fate. The counts and dukes of Anjou rose high, producing kings of England and Hungary, but their line was dogged by sudden deaths, betrayals, and madness. Whispers said it was Melusine's curse, forever winding through their veins. Another blood curse lay upon the Habsburgs, whose jaws grew strangely elongated, whose faces bore the mark of generations. Physicians today would speak of inheritance, of genetics, of intermarriage. But to those who lived then, the deformity was a sign, a punishment passed down, each mouth a reminder that their house was touched by something beyond nature. And still, the Habsburgs ruled vast empires, their curse carried into thrones and crowns, as if fate itself wanted their dynasty both exalted and marked. The stories of cursed signs were not confined to families and lands. Even relics bore them. The hand of glory, a candle made from the hand of a hanged man, was said to bring ruin upon any household it entered. Thieves believed it could paralyze entire families, leaving them helpless as their homes were robbed. But if the flame guttered, misfortune would fall not upon the victims, but upon the thief himself. The crown of Charlemagne, too, was whispered to be both holy and cursed. When worn by rightful heirs, it was said to grant strength. But if placed on an unworthy head, it would burn with invisible fire, leading its wearer to downfall. Kings who lost their kingdoms were remembered as those who had defied the crown's secret will. And what of the common folk, living far from courts and relics? Their curses were simpler, closer to the earth. A broken plow meant a poor harvest, but if it broke in a certain way, twisted iron pointing east, it was said to predict famine across the land. A cow that gave blood instead of milk, a hen that crowed like a rooster, a sudden storm of red rain, all were marks that something in the balance of the world had turned against them. The village wise woman, or the priest, or the wandering friar would be called to interpret. Sometimes they would bless the home with holy water. Sometimes they would warn, "Leave this place." Families abandoned cottages, whole hamlets moved because of such omens. The forest path bends once more, and you find yourself before a ruined stone arch. Vines twist around its base, and the air is colder here. It feels like an entrance to another world, a place where curses still breathe. You pause, listening to the stillness. The wind sighs through broken stones, and for a moment, it sounds like words, fragments of forgotten vows, warnings spoken long ago. Curses, omens, haunted lands. All these were part of the medieval world's rhythm, shaping the fears of peasants and the choices of kings alike. For to live in that time was to live in constant dialogue with fate. Every sign mattered. Every shadow carried meaning. Every family feared the mark of doom, as much as they hoped for the promise of blessing. The path beyond the arch is darker still. Somewhere in that silence, deeper myths wait. Not of curses alone, but of legendary creatures that stalked the medieval imagination. Dragons, basilisks, and the strange beasts that blurred the boundary between nightmare and faith. You take a breath and step forward. The path grows narrow, enclosed by branches that twist overhead like ribs of some vast creature. A soft mist curls between the trees, and within it, shadows move, not human shadows, but shapes, older, stranger. This is the realm of the medieval imagination, where monsters walked as surely as men, and where belief was stronger than sight. The most feared of all was the dragon. In manuscripts painted with gold and scarlet, dragons sprawled across pages, their wings outstretched, their scales hard as iron. They were more than beasts. They were symbols of chaos, greed, and sin. Priests preached of them as the devil's creatures, enemies of saints. Knights sought them out, not for meat or hide, but for glory, for the chance to prove themselves as Christ's champions. Yet peasants, too, believed. In caves and marshes, in lonely hills, stories grew of serpents that poisoned wells, of winged shadows blotting out the sun. A sickly village might blame the breath of a dragon. And if a night arrived and the illness lifted, was it not proof? One tale speaks of the dragon of Krakow, who laired beneath the Wawel hill. It devoured sheep, then children, until the city lived in terror. But a clever shoemaker tricked it with a lamb stuffed with sulfur. The dragon drank from the Vistula River until it burst. The hill, the river, the city all still stand, carrying the echo of that myth. But dragons were not the only serpents feared. The basilisk, the little king, was small compared to a dragon, yet far more deadly. Said to be born of a serpent's egg, warmed beneath a toad or rooster, its mere gaze could kill. In some tales, it needed only to breathe upon a man, and he would wither to dust. Travelers carried mirrors to defend themselves, for the basilisk's own reflection was fatal to it. In bestiaries, monks sketched the creature with the body of a snake, the head of a rooster, and a crown of spines. They believed it prowled ruins, deserts, or abandoned wells, places where men rarely ventured, where death already seemed to linger. Farmers in Germany swore that when hens laid strange, malformed eggs, they must destroy them at once, lest a basilisk hatch. Even the most skeptical lord would allow the ritual burning of such eggs, unwilling to risk the curse of neglect. Still deeper in shadow slithered the wyvern, lesser cousin of the dragon, two-legged and barbed-tailed. Heraldry loved the wyvern, painting it upon shields as a sign of ferocity. Yet for villagers, it was a thing to be feared, said to crawl across battlefields at night, feeding on the bodies of the slain. Its venom, people believed, could blacken the ground for years, leaving behind patches where nothing grew. Even centuries later, farmers would point to barren soil and whisper, "Here, a wyvern once slept." Not all monsters were serpents. Some walked like men. The werewolf haunted Europe's forests as much as the wolf itself. Peasants knew the sound of real wolves, their howls on winter nights. But the idea of men who became wolves, cursed, damned, or enchanted, was worse. In France, stories told of the loups-garous, who prowled villages at dusk. Some were men who had made pacts with the devil. Others, victims of curses laid upon them unjustly. They might attack children or livestock, but more often they simply watched, half hidden in the trees, their eyes glowing faintly, neither man nor beast. Trials were held for suspected werewolves. Men were accused, tortured, and even burned for crimes of lupine transformation. To the medieval mind, these were not fairy tales. They were dangers as real as famine or plague. From the northern seas came the terror of the Kraken. Sailors whispered of its arms, long as masts, reaching from beneath the water to drag ships down. Some said it was not one creature, but a whole island of flesh, rising from the deep to deceive weary sailors. In the fjords of Norway, fishermen spoke of whirlpools stirred by its movements, of fish driven to the surface in panic when the Kraken stirred. Though no sailor had ever seen it whole, the evidence of disturbed waters, of shattered boats, was enough. The Kraken was real, because the sea itself proved it. Closer to home, in the rivers of England, lurked the knucker, a water dragon said to haunt deep pools, called knucker holes. Sussex tales spoke of them as sleek and long, with eyes bright as lanterns. Young men tried to win fame by slaying them, but many vanished instead. The ponds remain, dark and still. And even today, villagers say the water never truly reflects the sky. But not every beast was wholly evil. The griffin, half lion and half eagle, was seen as noble. It guarded treasure, yes, but also represented strength and vigilance. Carved upon church walls, it reminded worshippers that even in the wild unknown, God's order had champions. In bestiaries, the griffin was said to mate for life, to guard its young fiercely, to soar higher than any bird. Knights admired it as a mirror of their own ideals, fierce in battle, loyal in love. Even stranger were the creatures of distant lands, spoken of by merchants and pilgrims. The manticores of Persia, with human faces and the bodies of lions, whose tails shot poisoned spines. The cainocephali, men with the heads of dogs, said to dwell in the east, who barked instead of speaking. The blemii, headless men with faces in their chests, reported by travelers who swore they had seen them in Africa. Were these monsters real? Medieval scholars argued. Some claimed they were allegories, moral lessons dressed as beasts. Others, pointing to strange bones or travelers' drawings, swore they existed just beyond Christendom's borders, reminders that God's world was far wider, far stranger than the fields they knew. The mist thickens, shapes shifting within it. For a heartbeat, you could swear a serpent's coil moves at your feet, or that wings brush the branches above. The monsters of belief were not only on parchment or in tales, they lived in the very air of the age, reminders of the boundary between the known and the unknown. Ahead, the path bends toward a clearing where the fire of another legend glows. There, we will hear the rest, of demons cloaked as beasts, of saints who tamed them, and of how these creatures became mirrors of human fear and hope alike. The clearing opens before you, and within it burns a fire of stories older than parchment, older even than the stones of castles. The glow flickers on images carved in the dark, creatures born of fear, faith, and imagination. To step closer is to hear the heartbeat of the Middle Ages, the way they looked into the unknown and gave it claws, wings, and fangs. Among the most haunting of such creatures was the demon beast, half spirit, half animal. Monks wrote that demons often clothed themselves in monstrous forms to frighten the faithful. In visions and temptations, saints were beset by creatures with goat's horns, bats' wings, or the bodies of wolves. These beings were not meant to be slain with steel, but cast away by prayer, by the sign of the cross, by steadfast courage. The Vitae of St. Anthony tells of nights where the saint was beaten by invisible claws, or mocked by forms that shifted from lion to serpent, from wolf to man. Yet when he prayed, the beasts shrank, crumbling into ash. To medieval minds, these tales proved that evil could take many shapes, yet all were illusions before the strength of faith. But not all encounters ended in triumph. In the forests of Germany, tales told of the Alp Luacra, a parasite spirit that entered the mouths of sleepers by night, feeding on their breath and blood. Peasants claimed those who wasted away without wound or fever had fallen victim. Priests were called to exorcise such unseen beasts, sprinkling holy water across beds and doorways. In Brittany, fishermen swore of the Morgans, water spirits with faces fair as maidens, who lured men into lakes and drowned them. Children were warned never to stray too near rivers at dusk, for the water shimmered with dangerous beauty. Such tales mixed beast with demon, predator with spirit, until the boundary blurred, and all that was left was fear of the unknown. And yet, there were also stories of taming. The most famous was of St. George, the dragon slayer, but there were others less known. St. Martha, who subdued the Tarasque of Provence. This beast was said to have the body of an ox, the face of a lion, the shell of a turtle, and the tail of a serpent. It terrorized villages, devouring cattle and children. Yet Martha did not meet it with spear or sword. She met it with prayer, with hymns upon her lips. The monster grew still, as if soothed by music, and followed her like a lamb back to the town. There, the people, in their fear, struck it down. But the saint's part was not to kill, it was to tame, to prove that faith calmed what fear alone could not. Such legends softened the sharp edge of the monstrous. They suggested that not every beast was to be fought with iron. Some could be transformed, healed, or led into peace. Medieval belief often blurred monster and man. The wild men of the woods, hairy and brutish, wandered through folklore across Europe. Some said they were lost souls, punished by God, half men who lived without speech or reason. Others believed they were simply people of the forest, hunters and hermits, twisted into legend by fear. In pageants, wild men were painted green, their bodies covered in leaves, their strength unearthly. They were both threat and curiosity, reminders of the line between civilization and wilderness, a line far thinner in medieval minds than in ours. Travelers brought back ever stranger accounts. Marco Polo told of giant birds in the Indies, strong enough to lift elephants in their talons, the rock, whose shadow covered ships like a storm. Crusaders whispered of men with tails, of tribes who ate raw flesh, of kingdoms guarded by monstrous beasts that no Christian knight could face. The further the journey, the wilder the story. But distance did not breed disbelief. Rather, it lent authority. If the East held such wonders, then the maps, with their edges crawling with painted beasts, must surely be true. For the world was vast, and God's imagination limitless. Still, among all creatures, perhaps none haunted the medieval knight as much as the wolf. Not merely the werewolf of curses, but the wolf itself, lean, hungry, silent in the snow. It was a beast that stole sheep, that prowled too near villages, that glowed in torchlight with eyes that reflected flame. To peasants huddled in their huts, the wolf was both real and myth, a reminder that the wild pressed ever close. Yet even here, myth softened into marvel. In Irish legend, wolves were said to guard men, to guide travelers through snowstorms, to stand as symbols of loyalty. Not all beasts were evil. Some, though feared, carried lessons of kinship and survival. As centuries passed, many of these monsters faded into story. Dragons shrank into allegory. Griffins perched only on heraldry. The basilisk turned into a cautionary tale. Yet traces remain. A strange fossil unearthed might be called a dragon bone. A trick of the light upon a pond might suggest a lurking knucker. A child's fever, sudden and inexplicable, might still be whispered as the touch of some unseen beast. Because monsters, in truth, were never only about the creatures themselves. They were mirrors of human fear, fear of the dark, of disease, of the forest, of the sea. They gave shape to the unknown, made terror visible, and in doing so, made it possible to fight, to tame, or at least to name. The fire in the clearing burns low, shadows crawling outward once again. The beasts retreat into the mist, but their echoes remain in tales, in carvings, in the whisper of branches overhead. The path ahead curves toward a quieter place, where stone walls rise and bells toll softly. There, our story will shift from monsters of the imagination to the myths of saints and relics, and the way faith itself shaped the very bones of history. The path bends from the forest, where shadows of beasts still linger, into a realm of stone and silence. Ahead rises a monastery wall, gray and weathered, its surface softened by centuries of rain. Beyond it, bells toll slow, solemn, and strangely soothing. Each note vibrates through the air like a heartbeat, guiding you into the heart of medieval faith, the world of saints and relics. Here, miracles were not distant dreams. They were believed to be woven into the very fabric of daily life. In a village chapel, the finger bone of a saint might rest in a gilded reliquary, shimmering in the candlelight. Pilgrims would come from miles away, kneeling before it, whispering prayers with cracked lips and weary hearts. For them, the relic was not a memory of holiness. It was a living presence, a bridge between heaven and earth. Relics carried power. Some healed the sick. A drop of oil from St. Walburga's shrine was said to cure fever. Some brought rain. The cloak of St. Swithin was carried in procession to end drought. Others guarded against war. The banner of St. Cuthbert was raised in battle, believed to turn enemy swords aside. The faithful touched, kissed, or gazed upon these objects not as symbols, but as vessels. In their silence, they spoke louder than any sermon. The cult of saints was not only about relics, but about stories, legends that blurred the border between history and wonder. Take the tale of Saint Denis of Paris. He was martyred, beheaded on the hill of Montmartre. Yet when the sword fell, the story tells us he rose, lifted his severed head, and walked several miles, preaching all the while, before laying himself down where the basilica now stands. To medieval believers, this was no impossibility, but proof of sanctity. The saint so filled with divine power that death itself could not silence him. Another tale tells of St. Catherine of Alexandria, broken on the spiked wheel meant for her execution. The wheel shattered at her touch, splinters flying like sparks, and her persecutors were struck down by its fragments. Artists later painted her beside the wheel, not as victim, but as conqueror, serene, crowned, untouchable. These stories were whispered not with doubt, but with awe. They were the echoes of a world where miracles brushed against reality like passing wings. Pilgrimage bound these legends to the land itself. Imagine the road to Santiago de Compostela, stretching across Europe like a thread of faith. Pilgrims limped, sang, or wept along it, carrying shells as symbols of their journey. They endured hunger, bandits, storms, yet pressed on, for the relic of St. James awaited them, and with it, the hope of healing, forgiveness, renewal. The road itself became a story. Bridges said to be raised by angels, springs that burst forth at the prayers of saints, stars guiding weary travelers at night. To walk it was to step into a living tapestry of miracles. Even smaller shrines held power. A farmer in Bavaria might journey a few miles to a wooden church said to house a scrap of the true cross. A mother in Italy might bring her fevered child to touch a veil claimed to belong to the Virgin. Each act was simple, yet beneath it flowed a river of belief strong enough to move kingdoms. And indeed, relics did not only touch the hearts of peasants, they shaped politics. Kings fought to possess them, for relics brought prestige. A city with the bones of a saint became a city of pilgrimage, its coffers filling with offerings, its name carried across Europe. Monarchs gave relics as gifts to secure alliances. When Baldwin II, the Emperor of Constantinople, found himself bankrupt, he sold the crown of thorns itself to King Louis IX of France. Louis built the radiant Sainte-Chapelle in Paris as a shrine for it, a jewel of stained glass, where sunlight turned into colored fire. Relics were wealth. Relics were power. Relics were proof of divine favor. But belief in relics also stirred doubt. Even in the Middle Ages, some asked, how could so many churches claim to hold the same saint's skull? How could a single saint possess enough bones to fill a dozen reliquaries scattered across Christendom? The satirists whispered, half in jest, that if all the fragments of the true cross were gathered, they could build a ship from them. Yet even such doubts rarely broke faith. For many, the question was not whether the relic was authentic in the way we think today. Its power lay in the devotion it inspired, in the miracles attributed to it, in the prayers that filled the air around it. In that sense, belief created reality, and reality, in turn, deepened belief. Monks recorded miracles with careful ink, as if they were history itself. A blind man who touched the shrine of St. Edmund and opened his eyes to light. A prisoner who called on St. Leonard and found his chains falling open. A storm that broke apart when pilgrims carried relics to the seashore, the winds bending to the presence of the holy. Such tales spread swiftly, carried by wandering minstrels, by letters, by merchants along the roads. Each miracle pulled another soul into the circle of devotion. The medieval world was heavy with hardship, famine, disease, war. To believe that a saint might intervene, that a bone or a fragment of cloth could carry divine touch, this was not mere superstition. It was hope. Hope made tangible. The monastery bells toll again, their echoes washing through the cloister like waves. Candlelight flickers along the edges of stone, illuminating reliquaries of gold and crystal. Within each, a fragment glows bone, cloth, a vial of dust not lifeless, but radiant with centuries of belief. And as you step deeper into this sacred hall, the stories thicken like incense. Saints walking headless, wheels shattering, chains falling away, crowns of thorns passed from empire to kingdom. The air hums with the weight of faith and the promise of miracles yet untold. The air within the monastery feels alive. It is not silence, but a hush, heavy with presence, as though the stones themselves breathe. A monk moves quietly along the cloister, his sandals whispering against the worn flagstones. In his hands he carries a reliquary, a small chest wrapped in gilded iron, its edges encrusted with gems. He sets it upon the altar with reverence, as though it were not wood and metal, but a living heart. The reliquary is opened. Inside lies a piece of fabric, thin as breath. To the faithful, it is the veil of the Virgin herself. They kneel. They cross themselves. They touch the cold floor with their lips. Pilgrims arrive in a slow procession. Some come limping, leaning on staffs carved with symbols of their journeys. Others carry infants, eyes wet with exhaustion and hope. A few are nobles, wrapped in fur cloaks, their rings flashing like small suns in the candlelight. They have come not for beauty, not even for ritual, but for contact with the holy. A woman holds her son, whose skin is pale, whose chest rattles with sickness. She brushes the fabric of the veil gently across his forehead. She does not look up when tears spill over her cheeks. For her, there is no doubt, no hesitation. This is the touch of heaven upon earth. Outside the monastery walls, faith takes other forms. In the countryside, peasants tell tales by firelight. They speak of saints who wander the roads disguised as beggars, testing the kindness of strangers. They whisper of relics that glow in the dark, guiding lost shepherds back to their flocks. They share warnings too. A relic mishandled brings misfortune. A saint ignored withdraws protection. Faith, in these stories, is both comfort and caution. It threads through every gesture of life, planting seeds, raising walls, even whispering before sleep. At times, relics did not rest quietly in shrines. They traveled. There was the great translation of relics, solemn processions, where saints were carried from one church to another. Imagine the streets thronged with people, chanting, weeping, stretching their hands toward the reliquary as it passed. Kings walked barefoot in humility, carrying saints on their shoulders. Bells rang, incense rose, and all the city became a river of faith flowing in one direction. Yet relics also moved in darker ways. During wars, relics were seized as trophies. Armies stole them to weaken an enemy's favor or to enrich their own shrines. When Crusaders captured Constantinople in 1204, they looted not only gold and silk, but bones of saints, crowns of martyrs, fragments of the true cross, scattering them across Europe. To some, it was sacrilege. To others, a divine redistribution. But to all, it confirmed one truth. Relics were treasures worth fighting for. In some corners of Christendom, relics became almost unimaginable in their claims. A monastery in France displayed the holy foreskin of Christ. Another church swore to hold the milk of the Virgin Mary, preserved in crystal vials. There were countless thorns said to be from the crown, countless nails from the crucifixion, countless drops of the blood of saints. And yet, pilgrims still came. Not because they weighed the claims with logic, but because they sought an encounter with something greater than themselves. If faith shaped the world, then the relic, whether true or not, became true in its power. Amid these wonders stood the lives of saints themselves, remembered in detail as though history and miracle were inseparable. Think of Saint Francis of Assisi, walking barefoot through the Italian countryside, speaking to birds as if they were his brothers. When he received the stigmata, the wounds of Christ's passion marked upon his own body, it was seen not as pain, but as a holy joining, a proof that heaven and earth could meet in flesh. Or of Saint Hildegard of Bingen, cloistered in her convent, yet seeing visions of blazing light, hearing celestial music, and composing hymns that shimmered with divine fire. Her words flowed into letters to emperors and popes, reminding them that even the most powerful must kneel before mystery. Such lives were themselves relics, not of bone or cloth, but of memory, inspiration, and unshakable faith. As night deepens, the monastery grows still. The candles sputter. The monks chant softly, their voices weaving into a tapestry of low hums. The reliquaries gleam like stars scattered across stone altars. You imagine the weight of those centuries of devotion pressing upon the air. The countless prayers whispered here for healing, for rain, for peace, for a child's life. The countless hands stretched out, trembling with hope. The countless tears shed in gratitude or despair. Each relic is not only bone or fabric. It is a vessel filled with all those prayers, all those voices, 1,000 years of longing, sealed in crystal and gold. But with dawn comes another sound. Footsteps. You walk with the pilgrims as they depart the monastery gates. The world outside seems sharper, filled with morning light. The fields are damp with dew, the air scented with smoke from cottages. The relics remain behind, locked in their shrines. Yet somehow their power travels with those who have touched them. The woman carries her child more lightly, hope steadied in her arms. The old man walks with less weight on his shoulders. Even the nobles speak softly, as though the silence of the monastery has followed them into the day. This was the miracle no chronicler could capture, the way faith reshaped lives, whether or not bones truly healed, whether or not wheels truly shattered. The relics gave form to a deeper truth that humans long to believe in something greater. And in believing, they find strength. The bells toll once more, farewell, and promise at once. Their echo lingers, rising above the hills, carrying stories with them. Stories of saints, headless yet preaching, of cloaks that ended droughts, of banners that turned battlefields, of crowns of thorns glimmering behind jeweled glass. And you walk on, the road opening ahead, carrying these echoes with you, as countless pilgrims once did, step after step, faith woven into the very dust beneath their feet. The story begins on a quiet road in the early 12th century. The Holy Land lies before you, dry winds carrying the scent of dust and sweat. The sun falls heavy upon the stones of Jerusalem, and the city hums with the footsteps of pilgrims from every corner of Christendom. They come weary, barefoot, with staffs in hand, their eyes lifted toward the holy city. But the road is dangerous. Raiders lurk in the valleys. Bandits hide among the cliffs. What was meant to be a journey of devotion often ended in blood. And so, in 1119, a group of 9 knights gathered. They were poor, not in spirit, but in possession. Their armor was plain, their horses few, their purpose singular: to protect those who could not protect themselves. Their leader, Hugues de Payan, stood before the king of Jerusalem and vowed that these knights would dedicate their lives to both sword and cross. Their home would be the Temple Mount itself, where once had stood the Temple of Solomon. And from that place they took their name, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the Templars. At first, they were little more than shadows among the stones, a small band of warriors sworn to chastity, poverty, and obedience, riding out on patrol while pilgrims slept in the safety of their tents. They ate simple meals, wore plain mantles, and prayed long hours. But word of their devotion spread, and in 1129, the Church blessed them officially. Pope Honorius II gave them sanction, and Bernard of Clairvaux, the great mystic, praised them as holy knights, warriors who fought not for plunder, but for God. From that moment, the Templars grew. Imagine their image: a knight in chainmail, white mantle draped over his shoulders, marked with a red cross. A cross so stark, so bright, it seemed painted with the very blood of martyrs. They rode in formation, silent, disciplined, as though a single will guided them. To see them charge was to see a tide of steel and faith crashing against the enemy. To pilgrims, they were protectors. To kings, they were allies. To enemies, they were terrors. And soon, their role expanded beyond the battlefield. Wealth began to flow into their order. Nobles donated land and gold, seeking the prayers of these warrior monks. Merchants entrusted them with treasures, knowing the Templar seal guaranteed safety. Pilgrims deposited money in one preceptory and withdrew it in another, carrying only a letter, a system that foreshadowed modern banking. The Templars became both knights and financiers. Their castles dotted the Holy Land, their farms spread across Europe, their coffers filled with donations and earnings. They grew into a power, not just of swords, but of coin. And with power came myth. Whispers stirred in the alleys of cities and in the dark halls of castles. The Templars were said to dig beneath the Temple Mount, searching for treasures buried since Solomon's day. Some claimed they had found the Holy Grail itself, the cup of Christ, hidden away from mortal eyes. Others whispered of the Ark of the Covenant, sealed in their vaults. Still others muttered about strange rituals, secret initiations, knowledge not meant for common men. The Templars, bound by silence, neither confirmed nor denied, and so the silence grew into legend. In the Holy Land, their castles became fortresses of stone and faith. Picture Crac de Chevalier, massive walls rising above the hills of Syria, towers standing like guardians against the horizon, or Safed, perched on cliffs, gazing down upon the valleys below. Within those walls, monks and warriors lived as one, At dawn, the chapel bells rang. Knights laid aside their swords and bent their knees in prayer. At midday, they drilled with lances, practiced with shields, prepared for battle. At night, they dined in silence, their heads bowed over bread and broth. No laughter, no boasting, only discipline, the rhythm of lives bound together. And yet, for all their piety, they were still men. Men who fought, who bled, who died. The battles of the Crusades stained their mantles redder than any cross. They stood at the horns of Hattin in 1187, where the Crusader army burned beneath the sun and fell to Saladin's might. They held the walls of Acre, desperate and defiant, as the last Crusader stronghold collapsed into the sea. Each defeat carved sorrow into their legend. Each victory carved fear into their enemy's memory. And through it all, their myths only grew stronger. By the 13th century, the Templars had become something greater than knights. They were symbols. To some, the very hand of God upon earth. To others, a shadowy order whose secrets threatened kings and popes alike. Their seal showed two knights riding a single horse, a sign of poverty, yes, but also a symbol that raised questions. Did it mean unity? Did it mean hidden meanings known only to initiates? Or did it whisper of something stranger, something concealed within their order? The people wondered, and in wondering, wove tales that would endure for centuries. As the chapter closes, you stand upon the ramparts of a Templar fortress. The wind pulls at your cloak. Below, the land stretches wide villages, fields, roads carved by pilgrims' feet. Somewhere out there, men and women whisper stories of knights in white cloaks, of treasures buried in vaults, of secrets that even kings dare not touch. The fortress bell tolls. The knights gather in the chapel, their voices low, their prayers echoing against stone. They are men of flesh and faith, yet already they are becoming myths. And the line between truth and legend blurs, as softly as the night sky swallowing the last colors of dusk. The dawn of the 14th century brought a chill into the halls of Europe. The Crusades had waned. Jerusalem was lost. Acre had fallen into the sea. The holy cause that once gave the Templars purpose had faded into memory, yet the order remained powerful, wealthy, respected, and feared. And that, perhaps, was their greatest sin. In France, King Philip IV sat upon his throne. He was a man of ambition and need, his coffers empty from wars and extravagance. His crown glittered, but his treasury clinked hollow. And before him stood an order of knights, wealthy beyond imagining, their castles spread across his lands, their vaults filled with coin, their influence echoing across Christendom. He owed them debts he could not repay. And so, in his eyes, the Templars became not protectors of faith, but obstacles to his power. Philip turned his gaze towards them and whispered a single thought. They must fall. On a dawn in October 1307, the king's command swept across France like a shadow. Templar houses were stormed, doors broken down, knights dragged in chains from their beds. The accusations were shocking, whispered with venom, that the Templars denied Christ, that they spat upon the cross, that they worshipped strange idols, heads of stone, relics of demons, that their initiation rites were obscene, their secrets heretical. The world gasped. Could it be true? The knights, tortured in cold chambers, confessed. Some cried out under iron and flame, their words spilling against their will. Others remained silent until silence was beaten from them. The confessions poured into the record, blackening the Templar name. And yet, how much of it was truth? Modern scholars have sifted through the parchments. They have traced the testimonies, weighed the evidence, studied the words written under duress. And they have found little more than shadows. The idols? Likely inventions of fearful minds. The heresies? born of the king's hunger for power. But in those days, truth mattered less than rumor. The Pope himself, Clement V, torn between loyalty to God and fear of the French crown, bowed to the pressure. The order was dissolved, its lands scattered, its knights imprisoned, its treasures seized or lost to history. And so, the Templars were broken. But legends do not die so easily. Whispers spread that the Templars had hidden their riches before the king's soldiers arrived, that wagons of gold slipped away under moonlight, carrying treasures to secret vaults. Some said the knights fled across the sea, their ships vanishing into the mist, bound for lands unknown. Others swore that in Scotland, in Portugal, in distant corners of Europe, the Templars lived on, their traditions hidden, their secrets preserved. The Grail, the Ark, the mysteries of Solomon's Temple. The whispers returned, stronger than ever, carried upon the lips of generations. And then there was the fire. In 1314, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, was led to the stake in Paris. Bound in chains, the smoke rising thick around him, he raised his voice for all to hear. He declared the innocence of his brothers. He denied the lies forced from them. And he called upon God to judge those who had condemned them. As the flames rose, he spoke prophecy, that within a year both the Pope and the King would face divine judgment. And so it was. Clement V died within weeks, Philip IV within the year. The prophecy became another thread in the Templar tapestry, woven with fear and awe. Centuries passed. The castles of the Templars crumbled into ruin. Their farms became fields once more. Their names faded from the rolls of kings and popes. But the myths endured. Some claimed the Templars had founded secret societies, guarding ancient truths. Others believed they held the bloodline of Christ, hidden across time. In the libraries of Europe, in the whispers of Freemasons, in the tales of treasure hunters, the Templars lived on. And even now, their image lingers. White cloaks, red crosses, silent riders beneath the moon, keepers of secrets, lost in time. The line between truth and legend blurs like mist over a battlefield. Were they guardians of pilgrims? Simple monks with swords? Yes. Were they also bankers, politicians, and men of immense worldly power? Yes. And yet, beyond these truths lies something deeper. The sense that the Templars belonged to both history and myth. That their story was not just about what they were, but about what they became in the minds of those who remembered them. So as you sit in the hush of night, imagine the silence of a ruined chapel where once their prayers rose. Picture the dim torchlight of a hidden vault, where treasure may or may not sleep beneath centuries of stone. Hear the echo of hooves upon forgotten roads, a formation of knights riding still, cloaked in moonlight. The Templars are gone, and yet they remain. The smoke of Jacques de Molay's pyre had barely drifted into the Parisian sky before whispers began anew. The Templars had been destroyed, their name blackened, their lands seized, but the question lingered. What of the treasures they guarded? And always, one relic returned to the heart of rumor. The Grail. The Grail. A vessel beyond compare. Some swore it was the very cup Christ raised during the Last Supper, its rim brushed by his lips, its surface glimmering with eternal memory. Others claimed it was the chalice that caught his blood as he hung upon the cross, sanctified by the sacrifice of God himself. But in truth, the Grail was more than a relic. It was an idea, and ideas have power that no crown, no army, no king can destroy. The first tales blossomed not from the stone halls of Rome, nor from papal decrees, but from the mouths of poets. In the late 12th century, Chrétien de Troyes spun his verse of a mysterious grail borne in solemn procession, a vessel shining in the dim light of a wounded king's hall. His tale was unfinished, like a door left ajar. And in that open space, imagination flooded. Others followed Wolfram von Eschenbach in Germany, Robert de Boron in France, weaving the threads of miracle and mystery. In their hands, the Grail became not merely a cup, but a symbol of divine grace, a vessel of eternal life, a key to heaven itself. And here, the Templars entered the story. Though the poets never named them, listeners and readers began to see the likeness. Who else but the warrior monks, the guardians of Jerusalem, could have found such a relic in the depths of Solomon's temple? Who else but the knights who vanished in smoke and secrecy could have carried away such a treasure? The Grail and the Templars entwined like vines upon an ancient wall. One gave the other life. One gave the other myth. But step closer, and the Grail itself seems to shift. In some tales, it is a cup of simple wood, humble yet radiant with holiness. In others, it gleams with gold and jewels, a treasure fit for kings. At times it heals, its touch banishing wounds and sickness. At times it blinds, punishing the unworthy. Always, it lies just out of reach. Always, it demands a quest. The knights of Arthur's court in the old romances were forever seeking it. Percival, young and untried, too innocent to ask the question that might have saved a king. Galahad, pure and unsullied, destined to achieve the vision denied to others. Lancelot, noble yet flawed, forever reaching but never grasping. And in their quests, medieval listeners found echoes of themselves, their doubts, their sins, their longing for grace. The Grail was not only a vessel, but a mirror, reflecting the soul of those who sought it. Yet even beyond legend, whispers of a real Grail trickled through the centuries. In Spain, in the Cathedral of Valencia, rests a chalice of polished stone, simple in form, ancient in age. For centuries, it has been venerated as the true Grail, its journey traced back through monarchs and monasteries. Popes have celebrated Mass with it. Pilgrims knelt before it. Scholars studied its form. In England, at Glastonbury, stories abound of Joseph of Arimathea, who carried the cup across the sea and buried it in the green earth of Somerset. There, springs are said to flow red as blood, the land touched by sacred memory. In France, in the Abbey of Montserrat, monks whisper of another relic, shrouded in legend, guarded still by cloistered silence. And still more chalices, more cups, more claimants rest in cathedrals across Europe, each venerated, each contested. But perhaps the Grail was never a cup at all. Some scholars have read the old romances with new eyes, seeing not relics, but allegories. The Grail, they say, was a symbol of divine knowledge, of spiritual enlightenment, of the soul's union with God. Not a vessel held in hands, but an experience carried in the heart. To seek the Grail was to seek transcendence. To fail was to fall into despair. To succeed was to glimpse eternity. Yet the legends of knights and quests, of secret orders and hidden treasures, proved irresistible. The Templars, destroyed in fire, rose again in myth as Grail keepers. Secret societies claimed descent from their line. Pilgrims searched the hills, treasure hunters delved into ruins, stories wove themselves into the very fabric of Europe's imagination. The Grail became both relic and riddle holy cup, eternal dream, shimmering mirage that receded the closer one drew. And even now, when the medieval world has crumbled to dust, the Grail still lingers in our thoughts, in libraries, in films, in whispered tales. It gleams faintly, eternal, untouchable. It is the dream of purity, the hope of redemption, the promise that somewhere, hidden in shadow or shining in plain sight, there exists a vessel that holds not just wine, not just blood, but the mystery of God himself. The Grail was a promise, and promises have a way of shaping lives. Across the centuries of Christendom, its story became a lantern hung high, guiding countless souls through a world of darkness, warfare, and doubt. Knights who listened to the romances did not hear merely entertainment. They heard a call. Monks who copied the tales upon parchment did not see mere verse. They saw instruction, allegory, a secret map to holiness. And so the Grail lived two lives, one in parchment and poetry, another in the hearts of men who longed for it. Think of the world of the 13th century. Castles rose like stone crowns upon hilltops. The banners of lords fluttered in cold winds. Pilgrims trudged along muddy roads, their cloaks soaked by rain, their eyes fixed on distant shrines. It was a world of hunger and plague, of ceaseless wars, of kings rising and falling like the seasons. And yet, it was also a world of yearning for justice, for peace, for a glimpse of heaven while still alive on earth. The Grail was the answer to that yearning, a single symbol that gathered every hope into itself, the healing of the sick, the forgiveness of sins, the triumph of grace over corruption. In the old tales, the Grail was always hidden, never given freely. It demanded a question. Whom does the Grail serve? It demanded purity, a night unstained by sin, a heart untainted by pride. It demanded sacrifice, the loss of home, of family, of earthly comfort. But for those who dared, it promised the unimaginable. Percival's innocence, Galahad's purity, Lancelot's longing, each reflected a different kind of seeker. And medieval listeners saw themselves in these figures, some too timid to speak, some flawed yet striving, some pure enough to see the Grail unveiled in shining vision. Yet outside the world of poetry, strange whispers persisted. When the Templars were accused of heresy, some claimed it was not gold, nor land they hoarded, but the Grail itself, a relic too holy, too dangerous to be revealed. Perhaps they had discovered it in Jerusalem, buried beneath the stones of Solomon's temple. Perhaps they had carried it across the sea, hidden in caves or cathedrals. Others said the Grail was not a cup at all, but the very bloodline of Christ, a living relic, hidden in flesh and generations, shielded from kings and popes alike. That myth, though late born, found its way into secret traditions, sparking centuries of fascination. Still others whispered that the Grail was guarded not by men, but by angels, hidden in places no hand could reach. A mountain, a spring, a secret realm beyond mortal sight. But the most enduring truth of the Grail was this: no one ever truly found it. Yes, chalices of stone and gold were revered. Yes, kings and popes laid claim to sacred vessels. Yes, pilgrims prayed before cups said to hold eternity. But the Grail remained elusive, more shadow than substance. And perhaps that was its greatest power. For if it had been found, enshrined in glass, worshipped in a single cathedral, it would have lost the shimmering mystery that made it eternal. Instead, by forever being just beyond reach, the Grail became something greater than relic or jewel. It became the embodiment of the quest itself. Knights went searching across forests and mountains. Pilgrims whispered prayers at wells and springs. Monks painted images of radiant cups, encircled by angels. Poets composed verses of visions and revelations. And in every act of seeking, whether successful or not, the Grail achieved its purpose. It lifted the human heart upward, toward a longing beyond this world. The Grail was not meant to be possessed. It was meant to be pursued. Centuries rolled onward. The medieval age gave way to the Renaissance to the modern world. The Grail did not fade. Instead, it shifted. It appeared in new tales, in legends of hidden treasures, in secret brotherhoods, in whispered conspiracies. In the age of exploration, men sought it across oceans. In the age of reason, scholars debated its meaning. In our own age, it flickers still, in books and films, and quiet dreams. And through it all, the Grail remains untouched, eternal, because it is unattainable, holy because it is unowned. To listen to its story is to be drawn into stillness, the flicker of a candle, the hush of a cloister, the echo of steps in an empty cathedral. To hear its name is to feel, even for a moment, the weight of mystery pressing gently on the heart. The Grail is not wood or stone. It is hope. It is faith. It is the quiet certainty that somewhere, beyond sight, there lies a perfection that can be glimpsed but never grasped. And that is why the Grail, more than any other relic of the Middle Ages, has never died. The sea was always restless in the north. It roared against the cliffs of Norway, hissed through the fjords of Iceland, and whispered cold secrets along the rocky shores of Greenland. The Vikings knew it well, its moods, its dangers, its hidden paths. They built their ships not as fragile vessels, but as living creatures of oak and pine, long serpents of the waves, with carved dragon heads and sails that billowed like crimson wings. For centuries, tales were told around the hearths of these sea kings, tales of voyages far beyond the horizon, past the lands of ice and fog, into a place of warmth and wonder, a place they called Vinland. At first, the world laughed at these stories. How could the Northmen, rough warriors of the sagas, have crossed the endless Atlantic? The chronicles of Europe were silent on such a land. No maps showed it. No papal bulls declared it. No Latin scholar placed it in the order of the world. And so, the Vinland sagas were dismissed as poetry, or as lies told by wandering skalds. But the Vikings, stubborn as the tides, kept the memory alive. It began with Eric the Red, who, exiled for bloodshed, sailed westward and founded a colony on the edge of Greenland's frozen vastness. His son, Leif Erikson, carried the hunger for exploration further still. The sagas tell us that Leif, hearing from sailors of a land glimpsed beyond the western seas, gathered his men and set forth. What they found did not resemble the icy barrens of Greenland. Instead, they saw forests tall as towers, rivers rich with salmon, and wild grapes growing in abundance, a gift of the earth unknown in their northern world. Here, the air was softer, the soil fertile, the winters less cruel. They called it Vinland, the land of vines. It sounded like myth, yet it was a myth born of memory. Picture the voyage, the creak of the longship's timbers, the salt spray on weathered faces, the steady rhythm of oars beating against the sea. For days and weeks, nothing but endless horizon, the men half singing, half praying, their hearts uncertain. Then at last, the cry from the masthead, "Land!" A dark line grew against the sky, green and wooded, fringed by beaches of pale sand. The smell of pine drifted across the waves. After so long adrift, it was as though the world itself had opened a hidden door. In their new land, the Vikings built small settlements. They cut timber for their ships, hunted game, and gathered fruit. The sagas tell us of meetings with the Skraelings, the native peoples of these shores, meetings that were sometimes peaceful, sometimes violent. For the Northmen were strangers here, intruders upon a world already ancient. Yet they left their mark. Archaeologists would one day uncover traces of their presence, iron nails, rings, the charred remains of hearths, all beneath the grassy mounds of Lance O's meadows at the northern tip of Newfoundland. What had once been myth became evidence. The sagas, once dismissed as legend, were revealed as history. For centuries before Columbus, the Vikings had crossed the ocean. They had stood upon the soil of North America. They had gazed at its forests, fished its rivers, and felt its wind upon their faces. But unlike the later explorers of Europe, they did not conquer it, nor claim it for crowns or popes. They touched it lightly, left their whispers in the grass, and returned to their own harsh world of fjords and sagas. Imagine sitting in a smoky hall in Iceland, listening to the old tales. The skald's voice rises and falls, the fire crackles, the shadows of the carved beams shift with the light. You hear of seas wider than thought, of lands beyond the known world, of heroes steering by stars and fate. Perhaps you doubt, as many did. But deep inside, you wonder, could it be true? Centuries later, the soil of Newfoundland answered that question. What makes the story of the Vikings so haunting is not only that they arrived, but that they left. Their settlements did not endure. Their attempts to plant roots in Vinland faltered under the weight of conflict, distance, and harsh necessity. Greenland itself struggled to survive, and the memory of Vinland slowly faded from the world's awareness, lingering only in the old sagas. And so, when the modern age discovered the Americas, it did so as though for the first time, forgetting that Norse ships had long ago cut across the same waters. Yet the myth of Vinland endures because it is more than history. It is a reminder of the restless courage of humankind, the willingness to set sail into the unknown, guided only by faith in wood, sail, and stars. It is the story of people who looked at the edge of the world and did not turn back, but pressed forward into mystery. And perhaps, as the waves whisper against northern shores, you can still imagine the red sails of a Viking ship, rising out of the mist, heading westward, chasing a dream that became truth. The northern wind carries many voices. Some are fierce, like the clash of steel and the roar of storms. Others are softer, like a lullaby hummed across the waves. And in that whispering wind, if you listen closely, you may still hear the stories of the Vikings, men and women, who dared to follow the horizon farther than any before them. Leif Erikson and his companions did not stay long in Vinland. The sagas tell of brief attempts at settlement, of timber huts raised near the shore, of fires lit against the chill of evening. They hunted and fished, gathered wild grapes, and marveled at the richness of this strange land. But the world they had entered was not empty. It was alive with people who had walked its forests and rivers for thousands of years. The Skraelings, as the Vikings called them, saw the newcomers not as explorers, but as intruders. At first, there were cautious exchanges, gifts offered, goods traded. Yet soon, fear and misunderstanding gave way to conflict. Arrows were loosed, weapons drawn, blood spilled upon the sand. And though the Northmen were fierce, they were also few, far from their strongholds, and unable to endure a war in a foreign land. So the Vikings withdrew. They returned to Greenland, then to Iceland, and to the sagas that kept their memory alive. Vinland remained behind them, a place both real and unreachable, a dream half-touched. Centuries passed. The settlements of Greenland grew weak, isolated by ice and hunger. The voices that once sang of Vinland grew quieter, fading like embers in the hearth. And so, when later centuries looked westward, when Columbus set sail under the banners of Spain, when maps were redrawn and empires dreamed of conquest, Vinland was forgotten. The world did not remember that Norse sails had already brushed the shores of America, long before the age of discovery began. Yet the truth has a way of returning, like a wave that withdraws, only to rise again. In the 1960s, at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary. The remnants of Norse buildings, the unmistakable traces of ironworking, artifacts that spoke in the same tongue as the sagas. What had once been dismissed as legend was revealed as fact. The Vikings had been here. The old songs had not lied. Think of that for a moment. 1,000 years ago, before compasses, before global maps, before the age of sails, filled with empire wooden ships from Greenland and Iceland, crossed an ocean no European had dared to imagine. They did so with courage, with skill, with faith in stars and sunstones. And when they reached the other side, they touched a world already ancient, rich with its own stories, its own people, its own wisdom. That is the haunting beauty of the Vinland Saga. It is not a tale of conquest, nor of crowns, nor of permanent settlement. It is a fleeting moment in history, a crossing of paths between distant worlds. The Vikings came and went, leaving only whispers in the soil, fragments of memory in the sagas. But their journey showed what lay beyond the known, and proved that human curiosity is as boundless as the sea itself. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine it. The twilight sky above the North Atlantic, the hiss of waves against the hull, the creak of timber, the murmur of men huddled beneath woolen cloaks. Somewhere in the distance, the faint cry of seabirds. Then, out of mist and salt, the dark outline of land. A new world revealed, vast and silent, waiting to be touched by human hands. For those Vikings, it was not legend. It was life. For us, it became myth, and now, at last, history. And so, the story of the Vikings in America closes like a saga itself, bold in its beginning, brief in its telling, eternal in its echo. They remind us that the myths of the past are not always illusions. Sometimes, they are truths waiting to be rediscovered. Sometimes, they are footprints hidden in the grass, revealed only when the wind blows in the right direction. The Vikings reached America. They stood upon its soil. They carried home the memory of forests and rivers and grapes growing wild. And though their settlements faded, their courage endures a reminder that beyond every horizon lies another mystery, another truth, another land. Tonight, as the story ends, imagine the longships once more. Red sails against the silver sea, dragon-prowed vessels gliding into mist, and voices, ancient and low, singing not of conquest, but a journey. A journey into the unknown. A journey that turned myth into history. A journey that still whispers across the waves. And with that whisper, the saga rests. Peaceful, eternal, carried away on the northern wind. History is never silent. It speaks in whispers, in echoes, in forgotten songs carried by the wind. Tonight, we have walked together through the shadows of the Middle Ages, through myths that once seemed like dreams, and truths that waited patiently to be found. We wandered among castles and cloisters, where alchemists whispered of elixirs, and monks guarded secrets in illuminated pages. We listened to tales of knights who sought holy relics, of plagues that left hidden marks upon the world, of forgotten cities that rose and fell beneath the earth. And we followed the longships across oceans, where Viking sails brushed the edge of a new world, centuries before maps caught up with their courage. Each story began as a myth, a fragment, a rumor. But like sparks in the dark, they endured. And when the world was ready, they revealed themselves as truth. Perhaps that is the lesson these myths leave with us. That behind every legend lies a heartbeat. That behind every rumor lies a memory. And that even in the deepest night, history still glows like embers, waiting for us to listen. So now, as our journey ends, imagine the stillness of a medieval night. The hush of a candle guttering low. The quiet of stone walls wrapped in ivy. The far-off sound of waves brushing a forgotten shore. And in that silence, the myths of the past rest no longer lost, no longer doubted, but alive, proven, and eternal. The Middle Ages have whispered their truths. Their myths have unfolded into history, and we leave them here at peace. Good night. And may your dreams be filled with stories that time has not yet finished telling. Step into the quiet echoes of the Middle Ages. In this immersive ASMR-style journey, we uncover the medieval myths once dismissed as fantasy and reveal the truths that time has finally proven. From hidden relics and sacred legends to forgotten cities, secret manuscripts, and even Viking voyages to America, each story flows gently into the next, guiding you through history's whispers like a dream. But the soft narration and timeless tales carry you into a calm night of wonder and rest.